So let's talk about the SAMOA Agreement, Nigeria, and the uproar about the promotion of LGBTQ rights. So quite recently, there was a major news story coming out of Nigeria, which also hit the international news media. And the story went something along the lines of Nigeria recently signed the SAMOA Agreement. Now, the SAMOA Agreement is an agreement between the European Union, the EU, and a group of about 77 countries in the global south, mostly from Africa, from the Caribbean, and from the Pacific Islander nations. And the official name they go by is the OACPS, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. And this new agreement, known as the SAMOA Agreement, was actually officially signed on the 15th of November last year, 2023, in Apia in Samoa. And I think about a week later, only 30 countries had signed it. So a lot of African countries had reservations and they still didn't want to sign the agreement. Most of them argued that they had to consult their own national laws. They wanted to check if there are any issues of compatibility, especially when it comes to same-sex relations and the promotion of sexual health rights. So the controversial story in Nigerian media was that this recent agreement, because Nigeria had not yet penned, that provided the basis for what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, where you've had a Nigerian newspaper known as the Daily Trust that published a story wherein they made the argument that because Nigeria signed the SAMOA Agreement, I think towards the end of last month, the agreement is an enticement for Nigeria to promote LGBTQ rights. And I think it's not only the article that was published on the Daily Trust, there were a number of Nigerian lawmakers who also joined the bandwagon and actually railed against the SAMOA Agreement. The question is, what exactly is the SAMOA Agreement? And how come it has become controversial, not only in Nigeria, but probably in many other global south countries, especially the ACP countries? How is it that so many of the member countries of the OACPS kind of held back or were a little bit reserved in terms of signing the agreement immediately? The SAMOA Agreement basically is the successor to what is known as the Cotonou Agreement. Cotonou Agreement was signed in 2000 between the ACP countries and the European Union. And that itself was a successor of the first cooperation agreement, which was signed back in 1975 in Lomé, Togo, which was known as the Lomé Convention. And so the Lomé Convention was replaced by the Cotonou Agreement in 2000. And when it comes to the Cotonou Agreement, the main goal of that agreement between the EU and these countries was to eradicate poverty. Fast forward to almost 20 years later, there are so many new issues that affect the relations of the EU and many of the ACP countries. And that's why there was a need to now come up with a new agreement that can replace the former one. And of course, the new negotiations, which took almost 2 years, were kind of hunkered down by the outbreak of COVID, different issues that were happening. Finally, an agreement was arrived at in Apia, in Samoa, and hence the signing of the new SAMOA Agreement, which is now supposed to continue with the same cooperation framework that started basically in 1975. Now, for the EU, the essence of having an overarching agreement with the ACP group of countries, 77 countries across the globe, is that they don't have to sign a bilateral agreement with each and every of the 79 countries. So if they can have an overarching agreement, which all those countries can come together, negotiate, agree upon the principles, the pillars, and stuff like that, then it makes their work much more easier. So that is actually the rationale for having such a cooperation agreement. And in as much as the priority in the previous Cotonou Agreement was eradication of poverty, according to what I've read on the new agreement, there are a number of priority areas that the new agreement will focus on. They range from the promotion of good governance, peace and security, promotion of human rights, social and human development, and the ones that appear to have triggered the controversy in Nigeria are the ones that are talking about the promotion of gender equality or gender mainstreaming, and the promotion of sexual and reproductive health. Now, during the negotiations, the 2-year period where the older agreement actually expired because there was no consensus, one of the most controversial ones that the EU actually later dropped was the idea of bringing in the gender identity, because many of the negotiators coming from the ACP countries believed that was kind of having a backdoor in the agreement into a possibility of bringing in LGBTQ issues to the ACP countries. And so that was dropped by the EU, but the current SAMOA Agreement still has as a priority area the promotion of gender equality. And gender equality, that is the bone of contention at the moment, because those who are making the argument in Nigeria that this new agreement is actually a way to promote LGBTQ issues, they are arguing that gender equality and gender mainstreaming is a euphemism being used by the EU to actually mask or hide the fact that they want to promote LGBTQ issues. Now, how strong is that argument? To be honest, I think it's a very flimsy argument. I almost would argue that there is a lot of paranoia, not only in Nigeria, in many global South countries. Right now, when they're negotiating any agreements with, let's say, Western powers, people are really, really paranoid. And maybe paranoia is a good thing. Like, you go into any negotiations, you shouldn't trust the other person as much. Like, you should be wary of you not coming out of the negotiations with the upper hand. So I can understand that paranoia. But on the flip side, I think those who have been making that argument, there's a leading lawyer who is also a columnist, and who I think a lot of the controversy goes back to.
Money is always involved, the money that is assessed, in this. I think we know very well that this was signed in order to spite Jonathan. No, Jonathan made anti-gay law. So this is to make the EU happy. So Nigeria will be able to access this money. This is what has happened now.
Like, they can simply find any word like gender equality and they'll say, okay, this is a euphemism for LGBTQ rights. And I mean, gender equality could be as simple as what it is. But of course, on the flip side, if you look at how gender is nowadays understood in the West, to include gender fluidity, gender binary people, etc., then of course one can argue that their understanding of gender is different to ours. So if they put gender equality in an international agreement, who's not to say that they will want their understanding of gender equality, which includes LGBTQI+++, to be the same understanding that we need to have. But then on the flip side, this is an international agreement. Nigeria and many other countries in the ACP, they have their own domestic laws. Another aspect to the story that was also raising a lot of issues in that newspaper article on the Daily Trust was the argument that Nigeria was actually going to pocket 150 billion euros in order to implement and promote LGBTQ rights. Now, of course, the Nigerian government came out and vehemently denied that.
Did not envisage that Daily Trust and the people behind it could descend to the reckless level of attempting to set the country on fire by falsely accusing the government of signing a deal to promote LGBTQ.
The answer to that is quite simple: the Global Gateway Initiative. In a nutshell, that is simply the EU's answer 8 years or so late to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, a similar kind of global program where they can invest in infrastructure, digital connectivity, and many other areas in the global south. What is earmarked for Africa is the 150 billion euros. So, of course, there was that story in Nigeria that, this is only earmarked for Nigeria, but the 150 billion euros is earmarked for the African continent, not Nigeria per se. And the Global Gateway Initiative is simply trying to counter the influence and the inroads that have been made by the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, no pun intended. So it's not a specific amount of money that is supposed to be going to Nigeria that the Nigerian government needs to pocket in order to promote LGBTQ rights. Anyway, I just thought it was a very interesting topic on how the SAMOA Agreement has become quite controversial over the past couple of weeks in Nigeria. And I think a lot of many other ACP countries haven't signed the agreement yet. But if you've had an agreement like the Lome Convention all the way from 1975, And from 2000 until 2023, you've had the Cotonou Agreement. Then I think it's really far-fetched to believe that the new agreement that is supposed to replace the previous one is going to insist on LGBTQ rights in the name of gender mainstreaming and gender equality being put front and center as the defining pillar or priority area when it comes to humanitarian aid and development cooperation between the EU and the OACPS countries. Thanks for watching this video. Bye.